Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 11th, 2025, and just about 2 days ago, we got our first real general election poll for the New York City mayoral's race that's set to take place this coming November. A lot of people have had a lot of takes around Mamdani's victory in the 2025 New York primary. A lot of people on the left and the right, and arguably even to the center, have all of their feelings about what they would like to see for New York, what they believe, who they believe should or should not be a mayor of this city with 8 million residents, a population larger than 38 states in the country. And as two of the mainstream candidates, Eric Adams, the incumbent mayor, a Democrat turned independent, and Andrew Cuomo, the former Democratic governor of the state, both calling on each other to drop out to form this coalition against Mamdani. Mamdani maintains a lead in the general election in this poll for the New York City mayoral race. And so it is quite interesting that with a lot of focus on this city, there actually isn't that many polls out from the city yet. And I get it. There's time for the general election to develop. There may be some candidates that drop in and out of the race. But the problem here is that Mamdani, despite all of this theatrics around Mamdani being defeated in the general election, you have a former Democratic governor across the state who served for 2 years, but not particularly relevant to the election, coming out and saying that Mamdani should be defeated and that anybody besides Mamdani is, but all of these different things, and yet the lead still seems unwavering for Mamdani. And I think a big reason for that is exactly what we saw in the New York primary back in May. In June. What we saw was that Mamdani was able to mobilize a base of voters that aren't even captured in polls, were not captured in any of them for the New York primary, as well as the fact that he really was ramping up turnout in key demographics, that even if they were captured within polls, were severely underweighted because nobody really expected Mamdani to supercharge youth turnout in the way that he did. What we found was about 25% of the primary voters in New York in this most recent primary had not voted in a Democratic primary at all or since 2012, essentially since the Obama era, which meant that a lot of these voters were turning up and turning out for the first time in a non-general election, seemingly for Mamdani. It was these areas that we saw these first-time voters really ramped up that Mamdani did the best. A lot of the voters really liked him and the vision that he presented for New York City. And so he won the primary on the first round, in the final round, by a very decisive margin. And so now, pulling ahead to the general election, it very much seems like Mamdani is on track for victory. A big reason for that is that based on the number of votes he got in the primary, he's actually just about 100 to 200,000 off from what Eric Adams got in the general election in November of 2021. Eric Adams only got about 404,000 votes in the Democratic primary. Mamdani, on the other hand, got about 565,000. And that's with Cuomo, who had tens of millions of dollars to his effect, countless endorsements ranging from former Democratic presidents to former Democratic governors to U.S. representatives all around Mamdani. Got some pretty major endorsements, AOC and Bernie Sanders, but certainly not to the degree that voters would know someone like Bill Clinton, or they would know, a former governor, whatever it might be. Cuomo was really reeling it in. Even so far that we saw one of the Democratic candidates drop out and endorse Cuomo. And so what we found in that New York primary was that many people underestimated Mamdani, and in a way, these polls might actually as well. But even if they are underestimating Mamdani, it's newsworthy insofar that it shows him with a lead, and Eric Adams trails not in second or third, but in fourth place citywide. Mamdani, in this recent poll, Slingshot Strategies did the poll, found that about 35% of registered voters support Mamdani. Cuomo's at 25%, Curtis Sliwa is at 14%, and Eric Adams is at 11%. Yes, you heard that correctly. The incumbent independent mayor of the city who won that Democratic primary back in 2021 is polling at just 11%. About 13% of respondents say, I'm not sure. I don't know who I'm going to vote for, which leaves some room for growth for somebody like Cuomo or even Mamdani or Adams or Sliwa. But at the end of the day, right now, nobody wants to drop out of the race. Eric Adams has turned to Cuomo's team and said, I'm the incumbent, you get out of the race. You lost the primary, why are you still running in the general election? On the other side, the Cuomo team says, well, you're the incumbent, but I'm polling ahead of you, and I'm in second place. Help me defeat Mamdani in the way that the Democrats coalesced around Mamdani to defeat me. And it's this entire argument here. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee for mayor in New York, also said that over his dead body will he drop out of the race, so you're not going to find it. All of these people have egos through the roof that are unwilling to cross-endorse, to do whatever it is, because you can't really cross-endorse. This is not ranked choice voting like it was in the Democratic primary. Maybe that'll be a case for the city council to try to take it up. But at the end of the day, Mamdani maintains this lead because the vote really is split. And it isn't really super difficult to see how in a head-to-head race, Mamdani might actually have a competitive race. After all, he did win 56% of the Democratic primary vote, which means about 44% of Democrats in New York City did vote for somebody else, right? Of those in the voting population. So in a general election, that candidate that got 44% head-to-head could get in some Republican support, guaranteed. I mean, the Republicans would much rather Cuomo than Mamdani. Some of these independents might pour in too, but we're not seeing a head-to-head race. For instance, in the New York City mayoral race in 2021, let's say there was a race where Eric Adams had lost the primary, and instead Maya Wiley had entered into this race and won, or Catherine Garcia. Both of them were to the left of Eric Adams and seen as more extreme by Republicans. Let's just say, this is all hypothetical. I'm not saying what happened because that's not the case. But let's talk about it, right? Let's say Curtis Sliwa decides, I don't think a Republican is viable in New York. I'm going to throw my support behind Eric Adams, even though the Democrats chose, in this hypothetical, someone like Catherine Garcia or Maya Wiley. And so what would happen in effect is that because so many supporters of Eric Adams voted in that primary, let's say he lost by a point instead of won by a point, a lot of them would vote for him in the general election, as would the entire Republican base, and maybe then could it be competitive. Republicans don't hold that much weight in New York, but as an alternative in a head-to-head match, garner about 26-27% support. And since the last presidential election, it has been growing. But that's still not enough to win. This is a safe, Democratic seat no matter what. And so it is this multi-way race that is actually favoring Mamdani. Yes, there are these three candidates, Cuomo, Adams, and Sliwa, who do believe that Mamdani is the biggest threat to their potential bid at being mayor. And they're right. He's the frontrunner. He brought in hundreds of thousands of new voters. He was polling at 1% back in February. 1%. You didn't hear me wrong. He went from 1% to 5 months later winning against a former governor who had $40 million to his name. Mamdani didn't even raise $10 million. That's what's the crazy thing about this, is that Mamdani really did have a grassroots effort and did change something about the race. He set out a blueprint that leaves a lot for Democrats to try to do in other parts of the country. Maybe his policies can't be replicated everywhere, but certainly the authenticity, the type of candidate you're looking for, Mamdani very much could be that person if it comes down to a character-by-character basis. But instead of coalescing around Mamdani in New York City, we are still finding that same opposition that opposed him being mayor in the primary is now opposing him in the general election. But Mamdani's support is still too strong. That's the thing. The entirety of this whole theatrics, this whole Mamdani cannot be mayor, isn't backed by what the plurality, or even in some cases the majority of voters want. There are Republicans out there that want Curtis Sliwa over Adams, over Cuomo, over Mamdani. There are some Democrats who prefer Cuomo. But at the end of the day, in this multi-way race, the viable pathway forward for Mamdani is very, very clear. He garners a huge chunk of support just simply by having the D by his name. And might I add, too, he will drive up turnout in that general election, not diminish it. It is Mamdani who is less than 200,000 votes off what Eric Adams got in a general election. That's how many voters he turned out in the primary. Remember how before the primary, even I thought Cuomo would do well. Why? Because everything was on his side. I did say Mamdani had the momentum and that there was still a very real chance that he won the primary. But to the extent that he won the primary by, no one really expected this. Not even the best poll for him, which was Emerson College, which was, in theory, the most accurate poll. But actually missed Mamdani's final margin. They said he would win by 3. He won by 13, right? And so looking at the first round, he clearly reshaped this election. Cuomo conceded on election night. There was no viable pathway forward for Andrew Cuomo as the ranked choice voting tabulation continued. And looking forward to towards the general election, rather than step back and endorse the Democratic nominee, Cuomo decided, I'm running as an independent. And it really is interesting because it is so fascinating to find that certain sects of candidates who are unrelenting and unwilling to accept defeat often do this to their own dismay. There are examples of candidates who have lost primaries to go on to win a general election and honestly govern or legislate quite effectively. Lisa Murkowski has brought in a lot to the state of Alaska, agree with her or not, has made herself a swing vote in the Senate. Republicans often have to listen to her concerns when it comes down to voting. In the big, beautiful bill, they did. She's the reason that bill passed. So looking at people like her, maybe Cuomo thinks he's going to pull a circumstance like that. but he really isn't that guy. Fundamentally has too many things stacked up against him because voters didn't want him to be governor. After multiple women, over 10 women came out against Andrew Cuomo in 2021, to the extent that almost the state legislature had to intervene and to impeach him from the governor's office. That's the degree to what we were at. And so this idea that he can now turn around and run for mayor is something that was very lost on a lot of voters. That's why Mamdani has a lot of support. And now that he's extending it, not through the primary, but also to the general election, Mamdani has Cuomo as the perfect foil. But not only him, but a Republican, Curtis Sliwa, an independent, Eric Adams. You have an unpopular mayor, a disgraced former governor, and a Republican in the city of New York, where Democrats outnumber Republicans by party registration 6-1, where there are more registered independents than Republicans, but far more registered Democrats in the city. This idea that Mamdani is going to be defeated by 3 different candidates, and yet none of them have a viable pathway forward, and the data is showing that Mamdani maintains the lead, something has to change. If there is to be a coalition against Mamdani, there needs to be one opponent to Mamdani, and even then, he still might win. Because if it's a Republican opponent, Mamdani wins. If it's Eric Adams, Mamdani wins. Even if it's Cuomo, yes, the Republicans might vote for him if they're voting, but what's to say that a Republican would turn out in an election of a Democrat versus a Democrat? Do I have COVID governor or do I have Zohran Mamdani? That would be the calculus for them. And so thinking now to see that Mamdani maintains this lead, one, I'm not surprised. But there's also a very real possibility this lead is a little bit truncated from what it actually is because it's missing those key constituencies that will still be turning out in the general election. Unless Mamdani's coalition was only built to last 4 months, which I don't think it is, he is still ramping up everything he can do to win this mayoral election. And we're seeing it. And so I think that the New York City mayoral race will be one that will be very important for the future of Democratic politics, how Democrats react and respond. We're seeing very different reactions to Mamdani's primary victory. The National Democratic Party, the National Republican Party are all being questioned around what might happen if New York City does have a self-described Democratic Socialist as mayor. These will be very real things that voters will think about, that the nation will talk about. New York City serves to be as a very important example that can be set for national, Democratic, Republican, whatever types of politics because of its very large population, and everybody knows New York. Eric Adams has seemingly not done a good job as mayor. After all, his approval rating is really, really down. But voters in New York have never really liked their mayor. They also never really seem to be that enthused by any of the candidates running for mayor until Mamdani. And while this isn't me trying to endorse Mamdani or endorse whatever it might be, that's not my role here. It's to relay this information to you. You can absolutely see something different. You can recognize when there is generational talent once in a generation in terms of talent in New York City, and Mamdani is that. So leading the general election as the Democratic nominee, I'm not surprised. I'm not in a position that I think, oh, wow, all of a sudden, this is something that really shakes the way that I look at the race. Not at all. Doesn't shake the race, shake the way that I look at New York, at Democratic politics, at regular politics, because it makes sense. He's a Democrat winning in a Democratic city. So we should watch it, the way that Cuomo, Adams, Sliwa all interact within this race, because it will be a big test, not just for Mamdani, because winning the mayorship is obviously a huge test, but everything around it. Democratic coalition building, Democratic base turnout, who decides to drop out, who decides to endorse who. We'll see it in full force in the 2025 race, because Mamdani is on the verge of making history. And while there are a lot of people who would like to put a halt to that and say, you drop out so we can stop this guy we believe is this existential threat, whatever it might be. Everything has been so theatrical recently, coming down to the New York City mayoral race. It'll be interesting, because I think that we can learn from a lot from it. If Mamdani ends up clearing a very substantive portion of the vote, despite it being a four-way race, that will also be news, because it is going to be probably one of the closer watched mayoral elections over the next 4 years. I think this one will really absorb a lot of the oxygen. We typically don't talk much about even Los Angeles. We don't talk much about San Francisco. We don't talk much about other cities across the country. It really is New York. I mean, we barely talk about Miami, which just moved their elections by a year. Maybe we'll talk about that in a future video. But again, that's still pending right now. The Attorney General says that's not possible. Getting a bit off track here. New York is definitely very interesting because it provides a lot to understand about our nation and local and state and national governance. And Mamdani's performance in this poll isn't surprising in the slightest, and it'll be interesting to see how the candidates react and respond over the coming weeks and months ahead of November's general election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2005 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.